A forest is breathing in the afternoon sun. The forest is at the bottom of the world. The afternoon is 20 degrees Celsius. A frog calls from a warm pond. The frog has a bony plate on its head. The frog does not know it is on the continent that will later be called Antarctica. The forest stands for many millions of years. Then the cold comes. The Drake Passage opens. The cold water wraps the continent. The forest dies. The frog goes silent. The pond freezes. 12 million years of nothing but ice follow. A wooden ship sails up to the ice wall in the year 1773. Captain James Cook climbs to the masthead. He sees nothing to the south but ice. He turns the ship back. He writes that these are lands doomed by nature to perpetual frigidness. 140 years later, a man walks across the ice toward a point on a map. The man reaches the point. The man finds another man's tent already there. The man writes in his journal that this is an awful place. The man turns for home. The man does not make it. The man dies in a small canvas tent at 79 degrees south, on the floor of the same continent the frog once called from. With him, wrapped in cloth, are 35 pounds of geological specimens. One of them is a piece of coal with a leaf pressed into it. The leaf is 250 million years old. The man holding it is 43. This is the drifting historian. Tonight, the continent that froze. Sleep well. History continues. A forest is breathing in the afternoon sun. The forest is at the bottom of the world. The forest stands on the land that will later be called Antarctica. The land does not have that name yet. The land does not have any name yet. The land has only its trees and its rivers and its ponds, and the small animals moving slowly through the leaf litter. The afternoon is warm. The light comes down through the canopy in long, soft beams. The beams are full of dust and pollen and small insects that drift between the trees. The light falls on the floor of the forest, and the floor of the forest is dark and rich with leaves that have been falling for thousands of years and have not been taken away by anyone. The trees of this forest are tall. Many of them are taller than a stone temple. Many of them are taller than a small church. The trees of this forest have been growing for a long time. The oldest of them have been standing for centuries. Some of them have been standing for 1,000 years. They are mostly southern beech. The trees we will later call Nothophagus. The Nothophagus has thick, rough bark that flakes off in long strips. The Nothophagus has small green leaves that catch the light. The Nothophagus has roots that spread wide through the dark soil. The Nothophagus has children, small saplings, growing in the gaps where an older tree has fallen. Beneath the beeches there are conifers, tall conifers with the slow, heavy needles of a southern hemisphere forest. We will later call them podocarps. They stand in the understory and the gaps. Their needles fall in soft showers when the wind moves. We will later call some of them Araucarian conifers. They are the cousins of the trees that will one day grow in the high valleys of South America. And beneath all of them, there are ferns. Ferns the size of a man. Ferns the size of two men, standing on each other's shoulders. Ferns with fronds so wide, a person could lie down on a single one and not have their feet hang off. The ferns make the understory dark. The ferns are the second canopy. The ferns are the world the small animals live in. If you walked into this forest In the afternoon, in summer, you would walk under all three layers at once. You would walk under the high beech canopy and beneath the slow falling needles of the conifers and through the wet green of the ferns at your shoulders. You would smell the soft sweetness of rotting leaves underfoot. You would smell the resin from the conifers. You would smell something warm and metallic in the air that you would not be able to name. It is the soil. The soil is rich with the iron and the ash of an older world that this forest does not know it grew on top of. You would hear the wind in the high canopy. You would hear the small clicks of insects moving across the bark. You would hear, somewhere off to your right, the slow flow of a river. You would not hear any human sound. There are no people in this forest. There have never been people in this forest. There will not be people in this forest for 52 million years. The trees do not know this. The ferns do not know this. The frog in the pond does not know this. The marsupial in the leaf litter does not know this. They only know the afternoon and the warm light and the dust drifting in the beams and the silence that is not silence because the wind is in the leaves and the river is moving and the insects are moving and the small four-footed animals are moving in the dark places under the ferns. A frog calls from a pond, somewhere ahead. The call is soft. The call is once. The call is a low sound that hangs in the air for a moment and then sinks back into the silence of the wind in the leaves. The forest does not know its own name. The forest does not know what year it is. The forest does not know that the warm, wet air on its bark will not last forever. The forest does not know that the ground beneath the dark soil is shifting in geological time, that the great mass of stone that holds the forest up is slowly moving away from another mass of stone to the north, that this slow motion will one day open a door that the forest cannot close. The forest only knows the afternoon. The afternoon is good. The forest is breathing. If you stood in this forest in a summer afternoon, the air would be 20 degrees Celsius, 68 degrees on the older scale. We now mostly leave to thermometers in kitchens. The air would feel warm on your skin. The air would not feel cold at all. This is not the Antarctica we know. This is not the white continent. This is not the wind and the ice. This is a place where summer arrives and summer holds. And summer is not a strange visitor, but the way the months pass. The mean annual temperature here, across the year, is 12 degrees Celsius, about 54 degrees on the older scale. The winters are cool, not frozen. The summers are warm, not hot. The land has settled into a long, quiet, temperate climate that the trees and the ferns and the frog in the pond all know how to live in. The carbon dioxide in the air is over 1,000 parts per million. The number does not mean anything to the forest. The forest does not know there is a number for the air it breathes. The forest only knows that the leaves grow large, that the wood lays down slow rings, that the ground is warm and rich, that the rain comes when it is supposed to come, that the dry weeks are not too dry, that the wet weeks are not too wet. The distance between the equator and the pole, measured in temperature, is much smaller in this world than it will be in the world the listener knows. The poles are not freezing. The equator is not burning. The whole earth is warmer and gentler than it will become. The forest at the bottom of the world is one piece of evidence for that. On the coast, the forest looks different. On the coast, the air is even warmer. The summers reach into the higher numbers. The water at the shoreline in summer climbs to 20 degrees in the shallows, the kind of water you could swim in without flinching. On the coast, palms grow, real palms, with the long arched fronds and the heavy clusters of fruit, the kind of palms that grow today on the warm shores of Brazil and Madagascar and Indonesia. Antarctica has palms on its coast. Antarctica also has Bombucoideae, the family of the modern baobab, growing wide and slow in the lowlands near the sea. A scholar who reads about all this, 52 million years later, has to keep stopping and looking up. The mind wants to rebel. The mind wants to say, that is impossible. Antarctica had palms. The mind has to go and stand in front of the photograph of the sediment core and look at the dark band where the pollen of the palms was found and say, this is real. The palms were there. The pollen does not lie. If you walked from the warm coast inland, the forest would change. The palms would thin out. The Bombucoideae would give way. The cool, temperate beech would dominate. The forest in the interior would look more like the Tasmania of the modern listener, or the South Island of New Zealand, or the misty, cool slopes of southern Chile. The same southern beech, the same slow, heavy conifers, the same wet green ferns at the shoulders. The forest in the interior is what the chapter walks through. The summer mean here is around 19 degrees. The winter mean stays above 10. The frost does not come, except on the highest peaks. The water in the rivers runs cold but never freezes. The frog in the pond can stay in the pond all year, and the polar night arrives. For 3 months of the year, this whole place is dark. The continent sits at the bottom of the world. The continent tilts away from the sun as the planet turns through its long, slow year. When the southern hemisphere tilts away, the sun does not rise here. For 3 months, the forest stands in the dark. The light does not come up over the horizon. The dawn does not arrive. The afternoon does not arrive. The world is night. The trees know this. The trees have lived through tens of thousands of these nights. The trees adapted long before the listener can remember. Some of the trees are evergreen, the way certain trees in the modern far north are evergreen, holding their needles or their small tough leaves all through the dark. Some of the trees are deciduous, dropping their leaves in autumn and waiting in their bare branches for the sun to come back. Some of the trees do something in between, but all of them survive the dark. The dark is not the killing thing in this forest. The dark is just the season. The forest has small animals. Most of them are marsupials. The marsupials are the warm-blooded animals that carry their young in pouches. We will later find them in modern Australia and New Guinea, and a few small corners of the Americas. We do not today find marsupials in Antarctica, but in this forest, 52 million years ago, and across the long Eocene that follows, the marsupials are here. They are small. Most of them are the size of a modern cat, or smaller, the size of a large rat, the size of a small dog. They move through the leaf litter on 4 feet, low to the ground, their long tails sweeping behind them as they slip between the ferns. They are quiet. They have learned to be quiet because the small things in the forest that are not quiet do not last long. They are opossum-like. The scholars who read the bones later will call them Didelphimorphians, a long word that means they belong to the same broad family as the modern opossum. They will find at least 10 different kinds of small marsupial in the bones of one part of the forest alone. 3 of them are Deraorinkids. One of them is something else again, called a polydolopymorphion. One of them is a microbiotherid, related faintly to a small marsupial that still survives in Chile today, called the monito del monte. The names are long. The animals were small. There are also a few larger animals, placental mammals, plant eaters. They are less common. They came from the north, from South America, before the land bridge between the 2 continents broke. They walked across when they could, and stayed when they could not walk back. Recently, scholars have found something else, a single mammalian footbone, a metapodial. It belongs to a xenothran, the broad family that today includes the armadillos and the sloths and the anteaters. This is the first time a xenothran has been found this far south. It is the first time anyone could say with certainty that the armadillos and the sloths and the anteaters once walked the forests of Antarctica. The animal that left this footbone is gone. The animal that left this footbone died, was covered in leaf litter, was covered in volcanic ash, was buried, was forgotten. The footbone is what remained. 50 million years later, a paleontologist working in cold mud on Seymour Island, on the eastern side of what we will later call the Antarctic Peninsula, picks up a small piece of stone and turns it over and sees the shape of a bone. And the shape of a bone tells the whole story of the family it belonged to. And the family it belonged to had been thought never to have lived here. The single foot bone is now in a collection. The animal that wore it walks somewhere in this forest, in this beat of the chapter, with no idea that its absence will one day be filled in by a piece of itself. There are birds. There are penguins. Not the small black and white penguins of the modern southern oceans. These penguins are big. These penguins are some of the tallest penguins that have ever lived. We will later call one branch of them Paleodyptes and another branch of them Delphinonis. The names will sound like spells in a language no one speaks anymore. The bones we find of them are the lower leg bones of birds that stood as tall as a small adult human. They wade in the shallows of the coast. They dive in the warm shoreline waters. They come up on the rocks to stand and dry their feathers in the sun. They are larger than any penguin a modern listener has ever seen. There are cranes and rails in the wetlands. There are small fish in the slow rivers. There are insects in the air. The air is rich with insects. The air is full of moving things. And there is the frog. The frog is in a pond. The pond is on the floor of the forest, in a low place where rainwater collects between the roots of the great beeches. The pond is shallow. The pond is dark with leaves. The pond has lily pads on its surface and bits of fern frond floating in the corners. The pond has a single frog in it. On a half-submerged log, in the afternoon, the frog is a helmeted frog. The helmeted frog is named for the bony plate on the top of its head. The plate gives the frog the look of a small soldier in an old helmet. The plate is real. You can see it if you pick the frog up and turn it in your hand. The frog will not like being picked up. The frog will struggle and kick its long back legs and try to slip free. You will set the frog back down on the log. The frog will sit and stare at you with its broad mouth set in a line, deciding whether you are a thing to be afraid of. We will later call this frog Calyptocephalela. The name is long. The name has been the family name for tens of millions of years. The frog does not know any of this. The frog does not know its name. The frog only knows the pond. The pond is good. The pond has insects above it in the afternoon. The pond has small fish in the corners. The pond has the log that the frog sits on. The pond has the slow, steady rise of the water when the rains come, and the slow, steady fall when the rains pass. The pond does not freeze in winter. The pond does not boil in summer. The pond holds itself at a temperature that suits a frog with a bony helmet on its head, and it has held itself this way for as long as the frog and the frog's parents and the frog's parents' parents have known. The frog calls. The call is low. The call is once. The call carries across the pond and into the ferns at the edge of the pond and into the dark soil under the ferns. The call is the only sound the frog can make. Nothing answers. The frog does not mind. The frog does not call in order to be answered. The frog calls because the afternoon is warm and the pond is good, and there is no reason not to. The autumn comes. The light gets thinner. The afternoons get shorter. The wind starts to come from a different direction. The marsupials and the leaf litter start to grow their winter coats. The penguins on the coast start to gather closer together on the rocks. The cranes in the wetland start to move toward warmer ground, the way birds have always moved when the year begins to turn. The trees lose their leaves, the ones that lose leaves. Their bare branches stand against a sky that is sometimes dark and sometimes thick with low cloud. The rain comes more often. The wind takes the last of the leaves and lays them in soft drifts under the ferns. The ferns themselves do not lose their fronds. The ferns hold what they have and wait. The frog in the pond does what the frog has always done in autumn. The frog moves to the bottom of the pond. The frog burrows a little into the soft, dark mud at the deepest part of the pond, the part the wind cannot reach. The frog tucks its long legs against its body. The frog slows its breathing. The frog will not eat all winter. The frog will not call all winter. The frog will simply be in the mud, in the dark of the pond, in the dark of the season. Above the pond, the forest goes quiet. The marsupials are not asleep, the way some northern animals will later sleep through their winters. The marsupials are awake, but slow. They find the warmer pockets of the forest, the ones near the roots of the great beeches where the soil is dry and the wind is broken. They huddle. They eat what they have stored. They wait. And then the dark begins. The sun, which has been getting lower in the sky for weeks, stops rising at all. One morning, the light at the horizon comes up a little, a long, thin grey along the edge of the world, and then sinks back again. The next morning, the light at the horizon does not come up at all. The next morning, and the next, and the next, the sky stays the deep blue and black of a night that does not end. For 3 months, the forest stands in the dark. The trees do not move. The trees do not need light in the dark months. The trees have stored what they need. The conifers hold their needles. The deciduous beeches stand in their bare branches and wait, the way a person waits in a quiet room for a friend who is coming home. The marsupials move in the dark. They have always moved in the dark, even in summer, even at night. The dark is the time for the small things in the forest. The dark is the time the marsupials and the small predators and the nightbirds do their work. 3 months of night just means 3 months of more time to work. The penguins on the coast huddle closer. In the wetland, the water at the surface of the pond starts to thicken. Not freeze, not yet, but thicken. The pond gets a thin skin on its surface, the way a cup of broth on a cold kitchen table will get a thin skin if it is left to cool. The skin is not ice. The skin is just the water beginning to remember that it could one day be ice, if the cold ever came in earnest. Below the skin, the frog is in the mud. The frog does not know the skin is there. The frog only knows the slow dark of the pond, and the soft mud at the deepest part, and the slow, steady rhythm of its own slow breathing. One year, in a cold week, somewhere in the middle of the long polar night, the skin on the pond gets thicker. The skin is not a skin anymore. The skin is a thin sheet of ice. The ice is small. The ice is the size of a hand. The ice forms in the middle of the pond, where the surface is most exposed to the cold air, and then it grows outward toward the edges. By morning, the whole pond has a thin sheet of ice on top. The frog does not notice. The frog is deep in the mud. The water under the ice is still liquid. The frog is fine. A week later, the cold passes. The ice melts. The pond is open again. The dark continues. The dark always continues. In winter, in the forest at the bottom of the world. And then, one morning, the light at the horizon comes back. The dawn comes. The sun crosses the horizon. The forest stands in the grey light of a returning sun. The light is small at first. The light is faint. The light is only there for a few minutes before the sun sinks back below the horizon. The next day, the light is a little longer. The next day, a little longer. The days build, the way they have always built when the year turns back towards summer. The marsupials come out. The cranes return. The frog rises. The frog rises slowly, through the warming water of the pond, up to the log on the surface, where the afternoon sun reaches the log in a long beam of new light. The frog sits on the log. The frog stares at the sky, with its broad mouth in a line. The frog calls. The call is low. The call is once. Nothing answers. The frog does not mind. The afternoon is warm. The pond is good. The forest is breathing again. The forest grows on dark soil. The soil is dark because the soil is rich. The soil is rich because the rock beneath the soil is old volcanic rock, broken down by time and rain and the slow, patient roots of trees and ferns, into a fine, dark powder that holds water and feeds plants the way a good cellar holds wine. On the eastern side of the continent, near the long curve of the peninsula that reaches up towards South America, the volcanic past of the land is closer to the surface. There are layers in the rock that came from old eruptions, ash that fell once, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and settled, and was buried by the leaves and the soil that came after. The ash is in the ground beneath the forest. The roots of the trees grow through it. The trees do not know. In other parts of the continent, far from the peninsula, the rock beneath the forest is not volcanic. It is sedimentary. It is layers of older sand and older mud and older clay, laid down by older seas and older rivers, hardened over hundreds of millions of years into stone. The forest grows on top of all of this. The forest does not know what is beneath it. The forest only knows that the soil is good. In time, a long time from now, a different kind of person will come to the eastern side of the continent in cold weather and dig down into the layers and read them. The person will be a scholar. The person will work for an institution called the Ocean Drilling Program. The person will bring up cores of sediment from the floor of the sea. cores that are long, thin cylinders of compressed mud and sand, and the person will look at the cores under bright lights in a clean laboratory. The person will see the layers of pollen in the cores. The person will see the dark bands where the palm pollen is, and the lighter bands where the beech pollen is, and the very dark bands where the volcanic ash is. From the layers, the person will read the forest. The pollen will tell the person that the lowland coastal forests had palms, and the family of the modern baobab. The pollen will tell the person that the interior forests had the southern beech and the southern conifers. The pollen will tell the person the temperature of the summers and the temperature of the winters and the amount of rain that fell. The pollen, in tiny grains the size of a speck of dust, will remember everything the trees forgot. The volcanic layers will tell the person when the eruptions happened. The carbon in the rock will tell the person how much carbon dioxide was in the air. The number will be much higher than it is in the air of the listener. The number will be over 1,000 parts per million. The carbon dioxide is the reason the forest can stand at this latitude. The carbon dioxide is the warm blanket the planet is wearing in this Eocene era that keeps the cold from settling at the bottom of the world. The forest, of course, knows none of this. The forest only knows the dark soil. The forest only knows the rain when it comes. The forest only knows the warm afternoon and the long polar dark and the warm afternoon that returns afterward. But the rock keeps the record. The rock will keep the record for a long time. The rock will keep the record long after the forest is gone. The rock will keep the pollen and the volcanic ash and the bones of the small marsupials and the foot bone of the xenothran and the bony helmet of a single fossil frog that was found much later on the eastern side of the peninsula in a stretch of sediment called La Meseta Formation, and that became the first proof anyone had that frogs had ever lived in the continent at the bottom of the world. The rock keeps everything. The forest does not need to remember. The rock will remember for it. The afternoon ends. The light through the canopy thins. The shadows of the ferns lengthen. The frog in the pond climbs back onto its log to watch the sun go down between two ridges in the distance. The sun is setting at the edge of the forest. The sun sinks between two low ridges. The light goes from yellow to orange to a deep red. The clouds at the horizon catch the red. The red lays itself down on the surface of the pond. The pond turns the color of warm copper. The frog sits on its log and watches the color spread across the water and does not understand color and does not need to understand color. The frog only sees the changing of the light and knows that the day is ending. The marsupials in the leaf litter come out. The night birds in the high branches stir. The cranes in the wetland fold their wings and tuck their heads against the cool air that always comes off the water at this hour. The forest gets ready for night. The forest has done this every evening for many thousands of evenings. The forest does it well. The frog calls. The call is low. The call is once. The call hangs in the air for a moment, in the red light, between the dark trees and the slow shadows of the great ferns, and then sinks back down into the silence of the wind and the moving water and the small clicks of insects coming awake in the cooling air. Nothing answers. The frog does not mind. The continent is good. The afternoon was good. The night will be good. The years will be good. The forest will stand for a long time yet. on its dark soil, on its volcanic stone, on its sedimentary stone, on the long, slow back of the continent itself. The forest will stand for millions of years. The frog will sit on the log in the warm afternoons. The marsupials will move quietly in the leaf litter. The tall penguins will stand on the rocks of the coast. The cranes will fold their wings in the cool air of the wetland. And somewhere, far in the future, far beneath the surface of the earth, in a place no creature of this forest can reach or see or understand, the great mass of stone that is holding the continent at the bottom of the world is beginning to move. It is moving slowly. It is moving in the way that stone moves. The motion will not show. The motion will not change a single thing in the forest this evening, or this year, or in the lives of the frog, or the marsupials, or the penguins, or the cranes. The motion is something only the rock knows. The rock is moving. The door is beginning to open. The continent does not know it is in trouble. The continent has the forest. The continent has the slow, dark rivers and the warm ponds and the ferns at the shoulders of anyone walking through. The continent has the frog in the pond, the helmeted frog, the one with the bony plate on its head, the one that calls once on warm afternoons because the pond is good and the air is warm and there is no reason not to. The continent has had all of these things for a long time. The continent thinks it will keep them, but the autumns are starting to come a little earlier. The summers are starting to end a little sooner. The wind is starting to come from a different direction in the months it did not used to come from. The high peaks have started to keep their snow. For a long time, the snow on the high peaks of the continent melted every summer. The snow came in winter, and the snow lay on the rocks all through the polar dark. And when the sun came back in spring, the snow softened, and by midsummer, the high peaks were bare rock again, dark and warm and steaming in the long, slow afternoons. But one summer, on one peak, the snow does not all melt. A small patch of it stays. The patch is not large. The patch is the size of a courtyard. The patch is the size of a small house. The patch sits in a north-facing hollow on the side of the mountain, where the sun does not quite reach in the late afternoon. The patch survives the summer. The patch is still there when the winter comes back. The winter buries the patch in more snow. The next summer, the patch is a little larger. The continent does not notice. The continent has many peaks. The continent has many small patches of snow that come and go. The continent does not count them. In the lowland forest, the frog calls from the pond. The frog calls in the same way the frog has always called. The frog does not know about the patch on the peak. The frog only knows the pond. The pond is the same as it has always been. The pond is shallow. The pond has the lily pads and the half-submerged log. The pond holds itself at the temperature that suits a frog with a bony helmet on its head. The forest around the pond has changed a little. The forest is shorter now along its northern edge, where the cold wind comes from in winter. The biggest Nothophagus along the northern edge have died. The smaller ones have taken their place, but the smaller ones are not as tall as the older ones were. The understory along the northern edge has thinned. The ferns along the northern edge have grown a little smaller. The forest has not noticed the change. The forest is the same forest. The change has happened too slowly to be a change. forest is still warm. The forest is still wet. The forest is still full of the small marsupials moving through the leaf litter, and the cranes folding their wings in the wetland, and the slow flow of the rivers under the great dark canopy. The frog calls again. Nothing answers. The frog does not mind. The afternoon is warm. The pond is good. Out at the coast, the water in the shallows is also a little cooler than it used to be. Not much. A degree, maybe 2. The tall stem penguins that come up on the rocks to dry their feathers stand a little closer together on cold mornings than they did when they were chicks. The fish in the bay are moving in patterns that have shifted a little to follow the cooler water. The cranes in the wetland are leaving for warmer ground a few days earlier each autumn. These changes are small. These changes are slow. The continent does not see them, the way a person does not see the grey come into their own hair. But the changes are real. The continent is at the end of an era. The continent does not know this. The continent thinks the warm afternoons will go on forever, the way every continent has always thought. The land is moving. The land is moving very slowly. The land is moving in the way that land moves, which is to say, in the way nothing else moves. The land moves an inch a year. The land moves the width of a finger across a generation. The land moves so slowly that no creature alive on the surface of the land can see the motion or feel the motion, or have any reason to suspect that the motion is happening at all. But the motion is real. Across the long ages, the continents of the world have always been moving. They have always been drifting on the great molten layer beneath them, pushed and pulled by forces that operate in the slow time of stone. They drift apart from each other. They collide with each other. They split apart and reform. They are not as fixed as they look to the people who walk on them. The continent at the bottom of the world is moving away from the continent to its north. The continent to its north is the long, thin land that will one day be called South America. For most of the long age of warm forest, the two continents have been touching. There's been a narrow strip of land joining them, a slow, curving bridge of rock and earth and old volcanic stone, running between the tip of the southern continent and the long, pointed peninsula of the bottom continent that reaches up toward the equator. Across this bridge, the small animals have walked back and forth for tens of millions of years. The marsupials of the bottom continent and the marsupials of the southern continent have been the same family of marsupials because they have been able to walk between the two. The Zen Arthran, whose foot bone will one day be found in cold mud on a small island, that armadillo relative or sloth cousin, walked the bridge in some long ago year before the bridge gave out, and then settled on the bottom continent and stayed. The bridge is getting narrower. The two continents are pulling apart. The land between them is stretching. The land between them is thinning. The land between them is the floor of a very long valley, and the valley is widening, and the floor of the valley is sinking year by year, inch by inch, century by century. The valley fills with water. The water that fills the valley is seawater. The water comes from the long, cold oceans to the east and to the west, the oceans that until now have been kept apart by the bridge. The two oceans have been like two great rooms in the same house, separated by a long wall. The wall is the bridge. The bridge is failing. The wall is opening. The first thin trickle of water from the Eastern Ocean meets the first thin trickle of water from the Western Ocean. The two thin trickles touch. The two oceans are now connected by a single narrow channel. This happens somewhere, in some particular year, in the deep middle of the Eocene, on a cold morning along the floor of the widening valley. There is no creature there to see it. There is no name yet for the channel. There is no name for the valley. There is no name for the moment when one ocean reaches another. But it happens. And once it happens, it cannot unhappen. The two oceans grow into each other. The channel widens. The land on either side of the channel pulls farther apart. This is the slow opening of what we will later call the Drake Passage. The Drake Passage is the gap between the bottom of South America and the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. The gap is real now. The gap is small, but it is growing. The water can flow through it. The fish can swim through it. The currents of the deep ocean can begin to find their way through it. The opening takes a long time. The opening is not a single moment. The opening is 1,000,000 years. The opening is several million years. The scholars who will one day measure the chemistry of the rocks at the bottom of the channel will narrow the opening to a window between 31 and 26 million years before our time, with the deepening happening across many small steps inside that window. The continent does not feel any of this. The continent has its forest. The continent has its frog. The continent has its high peak with its slow-growing patch of snow. The continent does not know that the door has opened. The continent will know soon. The water comes around. The water comes around the continent in a great slow ring. The water has not been able to do this before. The bridge to the northern continent had blocked the way. The water of one ocean stopped at the bridge. The water of the other ocean stopped at the bridge from the other side. Neither water could complete the ring. Now the bridge is gone. The ring closes. The water that comes around the continent is cold. The water comes from the deep south. The water comes from latitudes where the sun rarely reaches the surface. The water comes from places where the sea ice forms in winter, and where the dark and cold of the long polar nights have always lived. The water has carried the cold of those places for as long as the water has existed. The water has carried that cold because the water had nowhere else to go. Now the water goes around the continent. The water makes a slow ring around the whole bottom of the world. The water goes east, around the long curve of the continent, past the long ice-covered peaks the continent does not yet know it has, past the coasts where the tall stem penguins stand on the rocks and the cranes fold their wings in the wetland, past the bay where the slow river meets the sea, past the eastern peninsula and back around to the channel where it started. The ring takes many years to close the first time. The ring will take many millions of years to grow strong enough to do what it is going to do. But once the ring has started, the ring will not stop. The ring will be called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. The current is the largest moving body of water in the world. The current is many times the volume of all the rivers of all the lands of the planet, all flowing together. The current goes around the continent and around the continent and around the continent, never slowing, never stopping, always pushing more cold water past the coasts and the bays and the long peninsulas. The continent stands inside the current, the way a small island stands inside a deep, cold lake. The current does something to the water at the coast. The water at the coast used to come from many directions. Some of it came from the warm seas to the north. Some of it came up from the deep south. Some of it came across from the long, warm currents of the equator, bringing with it the heat the equator was always making. The water at the coast was a mixed thing, with warm bands and cold bands. And the warm bands kept the lowland forests warm, and kept the palms growing along the shore, and kept the warm shallows where the frogs and the fish and the long-legged stem penguins all lived. Now the warm bands cannot reach the coast. The cold ring stops them. The cold ring runs all the way around the continent, and the warm water from the north cannot get past it. The warm water from the north pushes against the cold ring, and the cold ring pushes back. The warm water is forced to turn aside. The warm water goes back north. The cold water stays around the continent. The water at the coast gets colder. The fish notice first. The fish have always known their water. The fish know the temperature of every shallow they grew up in. The fish know which corners of the bay are warm in spring, and which are cool in autumn, and which never quite warm up at all. The fish notice that the corners that used to be warm are now a little less warm. The fish notice that the shallows that used to hold the small bait fish all summer now hold them only in the middle of summer. The fish notice that the bay is not quite the bay they were born into. Some of the fish leave. The fish that have always lived in warm water move north, looking for the warm water they remember. Some of them find it in shallow seas far from the continent. Some of them do not find it and die. The fish that can take a little more cold stay. The fish that can take a little more cold do well, because there is less competition now. The fish that can take a little more cold have more of the bay to themselves than they used to. The penguins on the rocks notice next. The penguins have always come up on the rocks in the morning to dry their feathers in the sun. The mornings are colder now. The water they dive into for food is colder. The fish they used to catch in the shallows are gone, replaced by different fish, fish that swim a little deeper. The penguins learn to dive a little deeper. The penguins learn to come up on the rocks earlier in the day, before the cold afternoons begin. The penguins adapt. The cranes in the wetland do not adapt as well. The wetland is colder. The wetland freezes a few mornings each year now, where it never used to. The cranes leave a little earlier each autumn and come back a little later each spring. Eventually, in some year that no creature will mark, the cranes do not come back at all. The lowland forest along the coast begins to thin. The palms along the southernmost shores stop bearing fruit. The Bombucoideae, the wide, slow family of the modern baobab that grew in the warm lowlands near the sea, no longer set seed in good years. The seedlings of the palms and the Bombucoideae cannot survive the cold winters. The old trees stand, but they stand alone, with no children growing up around them. The continent does not see this. The continent feels nothing, but the continent is changing. The first cold has reached the coast. The freeze is starting to happen. The freeze does not happen all at once. The freeze does not happen the way a kitchen window frosts over in a single cold morning. The freeze happens the way a long, careful winter happens, with cold weeks and warmer weeks, and the cold weeks slowly winning over thousands and thousands of years. In the interior of the continent, where the high peaks have been keeping their small patches of snow each summer, the patches are now joined together. The The patches have grown into each other. The patches have grown down the slopes. The patches have grown into a single sheet of ice on the side of the mountain, and the single sheet is large enough that it does not melt in summer at all. The sheet sits on the mountain. The sheet grows a little each winter and shrinks a little each summer. And on the balance of the year, the sheet grows. The sheet is the first ice sheet. Across the continent, on many peaks at the same time, the same thing is happening. Many small ice sheets are forming. The small ice sheets join their neighbors. The small ice sheets become large ice sheets. The large ice sheets join their neighbors. The interior of the continent is starting to be covered with a single great cap of ice. This is what we will later call the Oligocene glaciation, the first major glaciation of the continent, the big, slow start of everything that the continent will become. The scholars who will one day study the timing of this glaciation will find that it begins around 33.5 million years before our time. They will find this in the chemistry of the small shells of the small sea creatures that fall to the bottom of the ocean and make a kind of slow rain of evidence. They will find it in the layers of the sediment cores. They will find it in the records the rock keeps. The scholars will agree on when it happened. The scholars will not agree on why. Two stories will be told. Both will have evidence behind them. Both will be partly right, and probably each will not be the whole story. The first story is the story of the cold ring. The first story says the ring of cold water around the continent did the work. The first story says the ring isolated the continent from the warm seas of the north and made the cold permanent. Without the warm currents reaching the coast, the cold of the deep south slowly worked its way up to the surface and onto the land and stayed. The second story is the story of the air. The second story says the air did the work. The second story says the carbon dioxide in the air slowly fell across the long Eocene from over 1,000 parts per million to something lower, and that the falling carbon dioxide made the whole world a little cooler. And the bottom continent froze first, because the bottom continent was always going to freeze first. Some scientists say the current closed the door. Others say the door was already closing. Both groups are scholars in good faith. Both groups have spent their lives in laboratories with thin slices of ancient rock under their microscopes. Both groups have read every paper the other has written. Both groups have arguments that hold. The truth is probably some of both. The cold ring helped. The falling air helped. The two helps came together at about the same time. The continent that was going to freeze froze. The honest thing to say is that we do not know which of the two helps was the larger one. The honest thing to say is that the freeze happened, and that more than one slow thing was happening together as it happened, and that the slow things together did what neither would have done alone. In the forest at the lowland coast, the slow things happening together do not matter to the forest. The forest does not care about the chemistry of the air or the temperature of the ring of cold water. The forest only knows that the coast is colder now than it used to be. The forest only knows that the trees along the northern edge died long ago, and that the trees along the southern edge are dying now, and that the seedlings that come up between the dying trees do not grow as tall as their parents did. In the lowland pond, the frog still calls. The frog still calls on the warm afternoons that still come. There are fewer warm afternoons now. there are more cold afternoons. The frog calls on the warm ones, and on the cold ones the frog stays in the soft mud at the bottom of the pond, and in the very cold weeks the frog sleeps and waits. The pond freezes a little more each winter than it used to, but the frog still wakes up in spring. The frog still climbs back onto the log in the warm afternoons. The frog still calls. For now, time passes. Time passes for a long while. Time passes for so long that the words for measuring time start to lose their meaning. The continent is in the slow grip of the freeze for many millions of years. The lowland forests along the coast retreat inland, and then retreat farther inland, and then disappear from the coast entirely. The palms are gone. The bombacoideae are gone. The wetland with the cranes is frozen most of the year now. But there are still small places where the forest holds on. There are still small valleys on the interior side of the long western mountains, where the air is a little warmer because the mountains break the wind, and where the soil is a little richer because the old volcanic stone underneath has not been worn out yet, and where small stands of southern beech still hold their ground. The nothophagus still grows in these valleys. The understory ferns still hold their fronds. The mist still rises from the warm water in the slow morning hours. These small refugees hold for a long time. The southern beech holds in the small refugees through the millions of years between the first great glaciation and the much later second great glaciation. The southern beech holds through the long Miocene that follows, the era of grassland and of the first ancestors of modern apes far away in Africa, while the bottom of the world stays cold, and the small refugees keep their small forests like candles in cold rooms. The frog does not hold so long. The frog is in the lowland pond. The frog needs the lowland pond. The frog needs the pond to not freeze. The frog needs the spring to come back warm. The frog needs the air in summer to be warm enough for the small insects that the frog eats. The frog needs the water to stay liquid below the thin skin of winter ice. The frog needs the world to still be the world the frog was born into. The lowland ponds are freezing now. The lowland ponds are freezing, not just on the surface, the way the pond used to freeze on the worst week of the long polar dark. The lowland ponds are freezing through, all the way down. The mud at the bottom of the lowland ponds is freezing. The frog at the bottom of the mud has nowhere to go. One winter, somewhere on the continent, the last lowland pond freezes through to the bottom for the first time. The frog in the mud does not wake up in spring. The next year, somewhere else on the continent, the next lowland pond freezes through. The next frog does not wake up. Across decades and centuries and many slow generations of frogs, the ponds freeze and the frogs do not wake up. And the population of helmeted frogs on the continent thins and thins and thins. There are fewer ponds that hold liquid water under the winter ice each year. There are fewer frogs in the ponds that do hold. There are fewer young frogs each spring. Eventually, in some year that no creature will mark, the last helmeted frog on the continent climbs onto a log on a warm spring afternoon. The frog stares at the sky with its broad mouth in a line. The frog calls. The call is low. The call is once. Nothing answers. The call sinks back into the silence of a forest that is mostly gone. The wind in the leaves is not the wind in the leaves of the great forest the frog's distant grandparents once knew. The river the frog can hear from the pond is a smaller river, running through a smaller valley, with smaller fish in it. The marsupials in the leaf litter are different marsupials, smaller ones, with different patterns to their movements. The frog does not know any of this. The frog only knows the pond. The pond is warmer this afternoon than it has been in a long time. The frog calls because the afternoon is warm and the pond is good, and there is no reason not to call. Nothing answers. The frog sits on the log until the sun goes down. The frog slips back into the pond at dusk. The frog goes to the bottom and tucks its long legs against its body. The frog sleeps. The next winter, the pond freezes through. The frog does not wake up in spring. The continent is now a continent of ice and rock, and the small refuges where the last forests still hold on. The continent is no longer a continent of frogs. In time, the last refuges will also fail. The last Nothofagus will die. The last fern will dry to dust. The last fish in the last inland pond will be still in the cold water as the cold water freezes around it. 12 million years of nothing but ice will follow. The continent was left to the ice, the way a house is left to its dust. The door is closed. Tonight, the wall of ice, and the man who turned back. A ship is leaving Plymouth on the morning tide. It is the 13th of July, in the year 1772. The harbour is quiet in the early light. The water in the harbour is dark and smooth, with the slow lift of the morning swell. The seagulls are above the harbour, in the way the seagulls are always above the harbour. The cook fires in the houses along the waterfront are starting to smoke. The town behind the harbour is waking up. The ship at the centre of the harbour is a converted collier. It is a stout, wide thing, broad in the beam, deep in the hold. A working ship rather than a fast one. The kind of ship that was built for hauling coal up and down the coast of England, and that has been refitted for a long voyage by the Navy. The masts of the ship are tall. The sails are bound up against the yard arms, waiting. The men on the deck are moving slowly in the morning cold, finishing the last of the loading. The name of the ship is the Resolution. The man on the quarterdeck of the Resolution is a tall, thin Englishman of 43. His face is weathered from years at sea. His coat is dark blue. His shoes are buckled. His hat is on his head against the morning air. His hands are folded behind his back as he watches the last barrels of beer come aboard. His name is Cook. He has been to sea since he was a boy. He has surveyed the coast of Newfoundland. He has sailed across the great Pacific Ocean and back. He has made charts that the Navy uses now. He is a captain in his own right, not by family or by fortune, but by the slow, steady work of a man who knows ships. The Admiralty has chosen him for this voyage because they know what he does at sea, which is to keep his men alive and his charts accurate. There is a second ship in the harbour, the Adventure, a little smaller than the Resolution, but built on the same lines. A second converted collier. The captain of the Adventure is a man named Tobias Furneaux, who has sailed under Cook before, who is dependable, who knows what he is for in this voyage. Furneaux is on his own quarterdeck, watching the same morning, doing the same slow inventory of the loading. The two ships will sail together. They will lose sight of each other and find each other again. They will pass through storms that scatter them and gales that part them, and long quiet weeks of empty ocean that test the patience of every man on board. They will not always be together. but they will start together. They start today. In the great cabin of the Resolution, two men are arranging their papers. The older of the two is a German naturalist of 43. His name is Johann Reinhold Forster. He has been hired by the Admiralty to study whatever the voyage finds. He has brought with him books and instruments and the small, careful tools of a man who measures and draws and writes down. The younger of the two is his son. The son is named Georg. The son is 17. The son is the assistant and the artist of the voyage. The son will spend the next 3 years drawing every animal and every bird and every plant the ships pass. He does not know this yet. He thinks he is going on his father's voyage. He is going on his own. The mission is to find the great southern continent. For more than 100 years, the geographers of Europe have argued about a land they have never seen. The geographers think a land must be there. The geographers think the lands of the south must balance the lands of the north, or the planet would tip over. The geographers have drawn the land on their maps and given it a name. They call it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. Nobody knows if the land is real. The Resolution and the Adventure are leaving Plymouth this morning to find out. The tide is running. The wind is rising. The men on the deck cast off the lines. The ships move out of the harbour under the first of their sails. The dock falls away. The lighthouse falls away. The houses along the waterfront fall away. The two ships find open water and turn south. The ships are in the warm seas for a long time before they reach the south. They cross the Bay of Biscay. They cross the long, warm middle of the Atlantic. They put in at Madeira for water and wine. They put in at the Cape Verde Islands for fresh food. They come down the long curve of the African coast across the slow trade winds and into the southern hemisphere. They reach Cape Town in late October. Cape Town is the last place. Cape Town is the last harbour where a man can step onto land that is fully claimed by Europeans. Cape Town has houses and markets and gardens, and the slow, patient work of the Dutch farmers who supply the ships that pass. Cape Town has clean water and fresh meat, and the last vegetables the men will eat for months. Cape Town also has news. The captains of other ships coming back from the east, ships that have been further south than the Resolution has yet been, leave their news with the Cape Town port officials. Cook reads what other captains have left. He learns what little is known of the seas beyond the Cape. He provisions the Resolution carefully. Salt beef in the casks, salt pork in the casks, ship's biscuit, which is hard dry bread that keeps for many months in the dry of the hold, wheat flour in the dry casks, beer in the wet casks, wine in the wet casks, cheese wrapped in cloth, dried peas, onions, and the thing that Cook insists on, which other captains do not, sauerkraut, fermented cabbage, packed in barrels, the food that Cook has come to believe will keep his men from the scurvy that kills sailors on long voyages. The men do not like the sauerkraut. The men complain about the sauerkraut. The men eat the sauerkraut because Cook makes them. Cook will lose no men to scurvy on this voyage. Cook will lose men to other things. He will lose men to fights and accidents, and one to drowning. But he will not lose a single man to the slow, soft death that comes from eating only salt food for months at sea. The death that takes the teeth out of the mouth and the strength out of the hands and lays a man down in his hammock to die. The ships leave Cape Town in November. The crossing south begins. The watches on the deck are 4 hours on and 4 hours off. The men sleep in their clothes when the cold begins. The men eat in shifts at the long mess tables below decks. The men work the sails. The men work the pumps. The men work the wheel. The men polish the brass. The men climb the rigging when the wind shifts. The men come down off the rigging when the wind eases. The men go up again when it shifts back. The wind shifts often. The air gets colder. The first ice comes into the sea around them in the middle of December. It is small ice at first, the ice of pieces broken off something larger somewhere else, drifting north on the currents. The men on the deck point at it as it goes past. The men have never seen ice in the sea before. The men make jokes about it, the way men make jokes about new things they do not understand. Then the larger ice comes. The first iceberg is seen by a man at the masthead on the morning of the 18th of December. The man calls down. The men on the deck come to the rail. They look at it. The iceberg is taller than the masts of the Resolution. The iceberg is the size of a small village. The iceberg is moving slowly past the ship on the cold current. The men do not joke anymore. Cook comes up to the rail. He looks at the iceberg. He goes back to his cabin. He writes in the log. He notes the position. He notes the size of the iceberg. He notes the temperature of the water and the temperature of the air. He puts the log away. He thinks about what is coming. The adventure is somewhere behind the Resolution, holding the same course in the same cold sea. The two ships have stopped trying to sail in close formation. The wind and the ice make close formation impossible. They sail within a few miles of each other most days. They signal at sunset. They keep their courses. The men on both ships sleep in their clothes now. The dawn of the 17th of January comes slowly over a sea full of ice. It is the year 1773. The sun rises late, this far south. The light comes up grey at first, then orange, then yellow, then a kind of pale blue that is the colour of cold water with light in it. The Resolution is under reduced sail. The men on watch are bundled in wool against the cold. The decks are wet. The ropes are stiff. The breath of the men is white in the air. Cook is in his cabin when the man at the masthead calls down. Cook climbs out of the cabin and goes up to the deck. The man at the masthead says they have crossed the line. Cook nods. He has been expecting this. He goes back to his cabin. He looks at the chart. He marks the position with a small, careful line of ink. The line falls just south of the line he has drawn on the chart for the Antarctic Circle. Cook is the first European to cross the Antarctic Circle. The position of the ship at this moment is 66 degrees and 36 minutes south. The longitude is 39 degrees and 35 minutes east. There is no marker in the sea. There is no flag. There is no celebration. The men on the deck do not even know they have crossed it, except the man at the masthead who has been watching the position. The Antarctic Circle is an invisible line on the chart. The Antarctic Circle is a line that mattered to the men who drew the chart, and did not matter to the cold sea that does not know about lines. Cook puts the chart away. He puts on a heavier coat. He goes back up to the deck. He walks across the deck to the foot of the mainmast. He looks up at the masthead. He climbs. Climbing the rigging in cold weather is hard for a man of 43. The ropes are stiff. The wood is wet. The cold wind pulls at the coat. The men below watch him climb without saying anything. Cook does not need help. Cook has climbed mainmasts since he was a boy. Cook reaches the top. He stands at the masthead with one hand on the mast and the other on a brass spyglass, and he looks south. The light is fully up now. The sea below the ship is grey with cold. The icebergs are scattered across the sea in every direction. Some of the icebergs are small. Some of the icebergs are larger than the ship. Some of the icebergs are so large they look like islands. There are pieces of ice between the icebergs, broken pieces, smaller than a boat, but large enough to crack a hull. The sea is white, where the small ice covers it. The sea is grey, where the small ice does not. To the south, the icebergs and the broken ice come together into a single wall. The wall is not a single thing. The wall is many things, many icebergs and many pieces of broken ice, fused together by cold and by motion, into a long line that runs from one side of the horizon to the other. The wall is unbroken. The wall is white in places, and blue in places, and grey in places, where the wind has worn the surface smooth. The wall stretches farther south than Cook can see. There is no passage through the wall. Cook looks for a passage. He looks with the spyglass first to the east, then to the west. He turns his head slowly along the line of the wall. He does not see a break in it anywhere. He sees what looks like a thinning in one place, far to the east, where the wall seems lower for a moment. But when he steadies the spyglass on the thin place, he sees that the wall continues behind it. Cook stays at the masthead a long time. The cold goes into his hands. The cold goes into his feet. The cold goes into his face. He keeps looking. After a long while, he climbs down. He goes to his cabin. He sits at his desk. He picks up his quill. He opens the log. He writes a single line, the line that every history of the Southern Ocean will quote afterward. He writes, "From the masthead, I could see nothing to the southward but ice." He puts the quill down. He blots the ink. He closes the log. He puts on his coat. He goes up to the deck. He gives the order to come about. The Resolution turns. The men in the rigging put more sail on. The Resolution begins to move north, away from the wall. The Adventure is 2 miles east. The Adventure also turns. The Adventure follows the Resolution north. The two ships leave the wall behind them. The wall stays where it was. The wall does not notice that two small wooden things were briefly in its waters. The wall has not noticed anything for a very long time. The wall is what is left of the continent the ships were sent to find. The ships do not know this. The Resolution and the Adventure do not give up. They go north for a few weeks. They warm up a little. The men recover. The pumps are fixed. The sails are mended. The salt beef is rationed out. The dried peas are cooked. And then they turn south again. This is the deep summer of 1773. Cook crosses the Antarctic Circle for the second time in December. The cold has come back. The ice has come back. The icebergs are larger than they were before, because the summer ice has been breaking off the southern fields and drifting north. And the second time across the line is colder than the first. The Resolution makes its way south through pack ice. The Adventure is not in sight. The Adventure has been blown east by a storm and has lost contact with the Resolution. Cook does not know where the Adventure is. Cook hopes the Adventure has made it through the storm. Cook continues south alone. By the 25th of December, Christmas Day, the Resolution is in waters no European has ever sailed before. The Christmas of 1773 on the Resolution is not a Christmas. There is no church. There is no cooked feast. There is salt beef and ship's biscuit and a small ration of brandy. The men sing the carols they know. The carols sound strange in the cold air. The men's breath is white as they sing. The man at the wheel is bundled in 3 coats. The masts above the deck are coated with ice. Icicles hang from the rigging. The icicles are as long as a man's forearm. When the wind shifts, the icicles strike each other and make a sound like small, thin bells. The sails are stiffened with ice. The crew has to climb up and beat the ice off the sails before the sails can be reefed or set. The ropes are rigid. The men's hands cannot grip the ropes well. The men's hands are coming up with patches of white frostbite on the fingertips. The men sleep in their clothes. The men sleep with their shoes on. The men sleep 3 to a hammock when they can, for warmth. Cook does not sleep much. Cook walks the deck most nights. Cook looks at the sea and the ice. Cook is thinking. He is thinking about the trap. The trap is the trap of the ice. The trap is the trap that the sea ice makes when a ship sails into a lane between 2 fields of ice and the wind shifts and the ice closes around the lane. The trap is the trap that closes behind a ship and leaves the ship sitting in a sea that is not a sea anymore, but a moving field of broken ice that grinds against the hull and that does not let the ship sail forward and does not let the ship sail back. The trap is the trap that has taken other ships in other seas, ships in the northern ice, ships that no one ever heard from again, ships whose timbers are still in the ice somewhere, with their crews still inside them. The trap can close in a single night. Cook stands on the deck in the cold of the Christmas night of 1773 and looks at the ice around the Resolution. The ice is moving. The wind is shifting. The lanes between the icebergs are narrowing in some places and widening in others. The man at the wheel is steering by the small clear water Cook can see ahead. The man at the wheel is steering carefully. Cook makes a decision. He gives the order to come about. The Resolution turns. The men in the rigging put on more sail, and the Resolution begins to make its way north, slowly, picking through the ice, watching for the lanes that are still open. He could have stayed. He could have pushed further south. He could have taken the gamble that the ice would not close behind him. He could have been the first European to cross the Antarctic Circle, a 3rd time, or a 4th, or to sail closer to the actual continent than any man had ever sailed. He did not. He turned the ship. He turned the ship because he had men under his command, and because the trap was real, and because the men he had under his command would not survive if the trap closed. He turned the ship because the work of a sea captain in cold waters is to know when to retreat. He turned the ship because the wall was not going anywhere, and because if the wall was going to be passed, it would not be passed today, and not by him, and not in this season. The Resolution made its way north. The wall stayed where it was. Cook tries one more time. He spends the first weeks of 1774 working his way south again. The Resolution is now alone in the Southern Ocean. The Adventure has been blown so far east that Cook does not expect to see her again. The Resolution holds a course that is more south than west. The ice gets thicker. The cold gets worse. The men are tired. The pumps work all the time. On the 3rd of February, 1774, the Resolution reaches its southernmost point The latitude is 71 degrees and 10 minutes south. The longitude is 106 degrees and 54 minutes west. No European ship has ever been this far south. No European ship will be this far south for almost 50 years after this morning. The Resolution is, at this moment, within 75 miles of the continent. The Resolution was sent to find. Cook does not know this. The continent is over the southern horizon. The continent is just below the curve of the Earth, hidden by the curve, invisible to the men on the deck and to the man at the masthead. The continent is there. The ice wall in front of the Resolution is not the continent itself. The ice wall is the floating skirt of the continent, the place where the ice that covers the continent reaches the sea and breaks off and drifts in great chunks. Cook cannot see the continent. Cook does not know the continent is there. Cook only knows that he has sailed as far south as any ship can sail, and that the wall is still in front of him, and that the wall has not moved, and that the wall will not let him pass. He climbs to the masthead one last time. He looks south. He sees the same wall he has been seeing for 2 seasons. He sees pack ice and icebergs, and the long, unbroken white line of the continent's edge that he does not recognize as the continent's edge. He sees what he has come to see. He sees what is the southern limit of the world. He climbs down. He goes to his cabin. He sits at his desk for a long time before he writes. When he writes carefully. He chooses each word. He knows that what he writes will be read by men in London who have never been at sea, by men in coffee houses and counting houses who have argued for 100 years about the great southern continent. He knows that what he writes will close the argument. He writes what he has seen. He writes that the southern waters are full of ice. He writes that no ship of the kind that has ever been built can sail through ice of the kind he has seen. He writes that any land that may lie beyond the ice is land that no man will ever visit. He writes that the land, if it exists, is land that is so far south and so deep in cold that no man could live on it. He writes the line that the next generation of geographers will quote, and the line that will close the argument for 50 years. He writes, "These are lands doomed by nature to perpetual frigidness, never to feel the warmth of the sun's rays." He puts the quill down. He blots the ink. He closes the log. He has not seen the continent. He has seen the door of the continent. He has stood at the door and tried to get through. He has been turned back. He has written that no one will ever get through. He is wrong about that. He is right that no one will get through with the kind of ship he has. The ships that will eventually get through are not yet built. The men who will eventually walk on the continent are not yet born. Cook does not need to know any of this. Cook only needs to know what he has seen. What he has seen is enough. What he has seen is real. What he has seen will stop other captains for 2 generations. He gives the order to come about for the last time. The Resolution turns. The wind catches the sails. The Resolution begins to make its way north, into warmer water, away from the wall. The wall stays where it was. The continent stays where it was, behind the wall, under the ice. Under the long, deep silence the continent has held for 12 million years. The continent does not know that a small wooden ship was briefly off its coast in the cold of one morning in the year 1774. The continent does not know anything. The continent only is. The Resolution arrives back at Plymouth on the 30th of July, 1775. The voyage has lasted 3 years and 17 days. The Resolution has crossed the Antarctic Circle 3 times. The Resolution has sailed further south than any ship in history. The Resolution has lost no men to scurvy. The Resolution has lost 4 men in total to other causes, which is a remarkable thing for a voyage of that length. The Adventure has reached Plymouth a year earlier, after losing contact with the Resolution. The 2 ships are reunited at home, in the harbour where they began. Cook delivers his report to the Admiralty. The report is long. The report is detailed. The report includes maps of the Southern Ocean that no Europeans have ever drawn before. The report includes the latitudes and longitudes of every iceberg of any size that Cook noted in his log. The report includes the temperatures and the winds and the current. The report includes the line that Cook wrote on the 3rd of February, 1774, about lands doomed by nature. The Admiralty reads the report. The Admiralty agrees with Cook's conclusion. The Admiralty does not send another expedition south. The Forsters publish their accounts. Georg Forster publishes a book called A Voyage Round the World in 1777. The book is written like a narrative, like a story, like a long, careful letter from a young man to other young men about what he has seen. The book is read across Europe. The book makes Georg Forster a famous naturalist before he is 25 years old. Georg Forster will spend the rest of his short life as a scholar in Germany, writing about the people he has seen on the islands of the Pacific, writing about science and about politics and about freedom, dying young in Paris in 1794 during the French Revolution, leaving behind his 271 watercolors of the animals and the plants of the voyage. Johann Reinhold Forster publishes a different book, a book of his own, a book called Observations Made During a Voyage Round the World in 1778. A scientific book, careful and slow, with chapters on the climate and the seas and the customs of the peoples the voyage met. The book becomes a standard work of the new science of geography. The book is read for the next century. Cook continues to sail. Cook makes a 3rd voyage to the Pacific to look for the Northwest Passage on the side that comes from the west. Cook dies on that voyage on a beach in Hawaii in 1779. He is not yet 50, but the southern continent is forbidden. Cook's report has done what no decision of any king or any admiralty could do. Cook's report has made the southern continent a place that no one wants to go. The geographers who had argued for 100 years that there must be a great southern long stop arguing. The merchants who had hoped to find rich shores at the bottom of the world stop hoping. The explorers who would have signed up for a southern voyage if a southern voyage had been offered stop offering. The Admiralty puts its money into other things. For nearly 50 years after Cook returns to Plymouth, no major expedition sails south to look for the continent. The continent is forbidden by a man who has not seen it. The continent stays in its long silence. The continent stays under the ice. The continent waits. In time, the continent will be visited again. In time, men will walk on its surface. In time, men will plant flags on it and die on it and bring back from it the leaves of a forest that grew before any man was born. But that time is far ahead. That time is 50 years, and then more away. That time is the time of a different generation of ships and a different kind of man. For now, the continent waits. The fire in Cook's cabin on the Resolution has gone out years ago. The Resolution itself is laid up in the Navy Yard and will eventually be lost in another voyage. The Adventure is gone, sold, scrapped. The Forster watercolours are in libraries in Germany and in England. Cook's log of the second voyage is in the archives in London. The lines about the ice and the wall are on its pages, in his own hand, in the dark ink that has begun to fade. The continent does not know any of this. The continent has its ice. The continent has its long dark. The continent has the slow, patient cold that it has had for 12 million years, and that it will have for many more. The continent waits. Tonight, 2 men walked to the bottom of the world. One came back. A man is standing on the deck of a ship in the harbour at a Portuguese island. It is September of the year 1910. The harbour is quiet in the warm Atlantic evening. The lights of the small Portuguese town climb the hill behind the harbour in a soft yellow scatter. The ship in the harbour is a heavy wooden thing, broad in the beam, deep in the hold, built for ice rather than for speed. The ship is named the Fram, which is a Norwegian word that means forward. The man on the deck is the Norwegian captain. He is 38 years old. He's been to sea since he was a boy. He has sailed through the Northwest Passage. He has crossed Arctic ice on dog sledges. He has slept in the snow caves of the Inuit and learned from the Inuit the patient old craft of moving slowly through cold country without dying. The Norwegian is wearing a heavy wool coat against the evening air. His face is weathered. His mouth is set in a line. He's thinking about a telegram he's about to send. His crew is also on the deck. The crew has been told an hour ago what only the Norwegian has known for the last year. The crew has been told that the voyage they thought was going to the Arctic, that they signed on for and packed for and farewelled their families for, is not going to the Arctic. The voyage is going to the Antarctic. The voyage is going to the bottom of the world. The voyage is going to try for the South Pole. The crew has taken the news quietly. Most of them are men who have sailed with the Norwegian before. They trust him. They will go where he goes. But there is one man who must be told. One man on the other side of the world who has spent 2 years preparing his own expedition to the same place, who has assembled his own ship and his own scientific team and his own depots, who is right now on his own ship, somewhere off the coast of Australia, sailing south to make his attempt. The man is Robert Falcon Scott. Scott is English. Scott is a Navy captain. Scott is 42. Scott has been south before, on the Discovery expedition of 1901 to 1904. Scott has been planning this second expedition for years. Scott has the support of the Royal Geographical Society and the British Admiralty. Scott does not know that the Norwegian is also going to the pole. Scott thinks the Norwegian is going to the Arctic. The world thinks the Norwegian is going to the Arctic. The Norwegian lied to the world to keep his lead. Now the Norwegian has reached the island, and the lie cannot be carried any further. Now the Norwegian owes Scott the courtesy of telling him. The Norwegian has written the telegram already. It is short. It is the shortest message the Navy can carry. The telegram says, "Beg leave to inform you, from proceeding Antarctic." The Norwegian reads the telegram once more in the evening light. Then he hands it to the runner who will take it to the cable office in the town. The runner goes. The Norwegian turns and looks out across the harbour at the dark water. The harbour opens onto the Atlantic. The Atlantic opens onto the world. Somewhere out there, on a different ship, in a different time zone, Robert Falcon Scott is going to receive that telegram in a few days. Scott is going to read it. Scott is going to understand that he is no longer alone in his ambition. Scott is going to understand that there is a race now, whether he wants there to be one or not. The Norwegian does not feel guilty. The Norwegian has done what he had to do. The Arctic was already taken from him by another expedition that had announced its plans first. The Antarctic was the only pole left. The Norwegian could not say so publicly until he was at sea, because if he had said so publicly, the British would have moved faster to beat him, and he might have lost the only pole he could still try for. The lie was necessary. The lie is now told. The Norwegian goes below deck. He gives the order to the captain of the Fram to weigh anchor at the morning tide. The Fram leaves the island before dawn the next day. The Fram crosses the long, warm middle of the Atlantic. The Fram comes down past the south of Africa. The Fram enters the cold belt of the Southern Ocean. The Fram passes through the same waters that Cook had stopped at more than 130 years before, when Cook had turned back and written that the continent was doomed by nature to perpetual frigidness. The Fram does not turn back. The Fram sails into the Ross Sea on the 14th of January, 1911. The Fram lands at a place along the Great Ross Ice Shelf called the Bay of Whales. The Bay of Whales is 60 miles closer to the South Pole than the place Scott will make his own base, on the other side of the same ice shelf. 2 months later, the Norwegian and his crew offload the ship onto the ice. Dogs, sledges, wooden huts cut to assembly, food, fuel, tents, the patient gear of a man who is going to stay on the ice for a winter and then walk to the bottom of the world. His team for the polar march is small, 4 men besides himself. A ski champion from the mountains of southern Norway, a sea captain from the far north, an officer who had crossed ice fields before, a younger sailor who had earned his place by hard work. The 5 men set their camp on the ice. They look south. They wait for the polar night to pass. A man is reading by oil lamp in a wooden hut at the edge of the world. It is April of the year 1911. The hut sits on a low rocky point on the western side of a long bay called McMurdo Sound. The bay is on the other side of the Ross Ice Shelf from the Bay of Whales, where the Norwegians' camp is. The 2 camps do not know each other's exact positions. The 2 camps will not know until much later in the year. The hut is 1 room. The hut is 40 feet long and 20 wide. The hut has a stove at one end and a long table in the middle and rows of bunks along the walls. The hut smells of paraffin and wet wool and the smoke of the cooking fire. The hut has been built to last a winter. The men inside it call it Hut Point. The man reading at the table is Robert Falcon Scott. Scott is 42. Scott is reading a dispatch that came in with the last ship. The dispatch tells him that the Norwegian is on the ice. The Norwegian is at the Bay of Whales. The Norwegian is 60 miles closer to the pole. The Norwegian has dogs and ski experts, and a man who can hit a moving target with a rifle at 200 yards. Scott has read the dispatch many times. Scott reads it again now in the lamplight. Scott does not change his face when he reads. The men in the hut do not see the captain react. The captain reacts only when he is alone. And tonight, he is not alone, because tonight the wind is loud against the western wall, and the men are inside with him, eating and talking and writing their own letters to their own families that they will not be able to send for many months. Scott has his own team. Scott has Edward Wilson, who is the chief scientific officer of the expedition, a doctor and an ornithologist and a friend of long standing. Wilson is sitting near the stove sketching. Wilson is always sketching. Wilson sketches the men, the dogs, the birds, the ice, the cliffs of the western mountains, the way the light falls on the ridge at noon, the way the steam comes off the cooking pot. Scott has Henry Bowers, a small dark man whom the men call Birdie because of his face. Bowers is 28 years old and built like a stove and stronger than men twice his size. Bowers does not feel the cold. Bowers does not complain about anything. Bowers is the one Scott will choose for the polar party at the last minute. Scott has Lawrence Oates, an army officer in his 30s, a cavalryman from a good English family, a man who knows horses. Scott has brought ponies to the Antarctic, ponies along with the dogs, because Scott believes the ponies can pull more weight than dogs over short distances. Oates is in charge of the ponies. Oates does not believe in the ponies. Oates has said so. Oates says the ponies are the wrong animal for this country. Scott has heard Oates and chosen not to listen. Scott has Edgar Evans, a Navy petty officer, a Welshman from the coast of Wales, who has been south with Scott before on the Discovery expedition. Evans is strong. Evans is loyal. Evans is the kind of man who follows orders without arguing. These 4 men, plus Scott himself, will make the final dash to the pole. They will not all return. Scott folds the dispatch and puts it in his pocket. He stands. He walks to the door of the hut and looks out into the night. The night here is not the night of a normal place. The night here is a polar night. The sun has been below the horizon for weeks. The light outside the hut is the soft blue light of a long twilight. The wind is bringing snow off the ridge. The dogs are huddled in their shelters. The hut is warm enough inside, but the air against the door is bitter. Scott thinks about the route. The route to the pole from McMurdo Sound goes south across the Ross Ice Shelf, the great flat sheet of floating ice that fills the bay between the Transantarctic Mountains and the open sea. The Ross Ice Shelf is several hundred miles wide. The Ross Ice Shelf is the easy part. After the shelf comes the climb up onto the high polar plateau, 10,000 feet above the sea, where the air is thin and the cold is killing, and the wind comes from every direction at once. The climb up onto the plateau goes by way of a great glacier that one of Scott's predecessors named the Beardmore. The Beardmore is 120 miles long. The Beardmore rises from the shelf to the plateau in a long, broken staircase of ice falls and crevasses. The Beardmore is the route Scott has chosen. The Beardmore is longer than the route the Norwegian has chosen. The Norwegian has chosen a glacier farther east. A glacier farther east. Their glacier is shorter than the Beardmore. Their glacier is steeper. The Norwegians will rise to the plateau faster than Scott. The Norwegians will start 60 miles closer. The Norwegians will use dogs that pull at a steady run all day. Scott will use ponies that fail in the first weeks and have to be shot. Scott will use dogs that he sends back early because he does not trust them on the plateau. Scott will use men to pull the sledges. This is the decision. This is the most debated tactical choice of the expedition. Scott has chosen man-hauling. Scott has chosen for himself and his men to be the engines of the sledges from the foot of the Beardmore onward. Scott has chosen this because of the British naval ideal that says a sailor does his own work and does not let an animal do it for him. Scott has chosen this because of his own preference after the Discovery expedition against using dogs the way the Norwegians use dogs, which is to use the slower dogs for meat for the faster dogs once the food runs low. Scott has read the Norwegians' planning document, and Scott does not like what he reads. Scott has chosen the British way. Scott will lose the race because of this choice. Scott will not know that until later. Scott may not have known it ever, in the way that matters. Scott closes the door of the hut. He walks back to the table. He sits down beside Wilson, who is still sketching. Wilson does not look up. Scott writes a few lines in his journal. Then he closes the journal. He puts the dispatch about the Norwegian back in his pocket. He blows out the lamp at his place at the table. The hut is quiet. The wind is loud against the western wall. The 5 Norwegians leave the Bay of Whales on the 19th of October, 1911. The polar night has passed. The sun has come back. The ice is firmer than it was in the cold of winter. The dogs have been resting and eating now and have built up the fat they will need for the long pull south. The Norwegians team takes 4 sledges and 52 dogs. The sledges carry food, fuel, instruments, tents, sleeping bags of reindeer fur, boots of reindeer fur, wool layers, oilskin shells against the wind, paraffin, Primus stoves, the Nansen cookers that boil water inside a thick, insulated jacket, the careful gear of a polar party that knows what the polar plateau is. The men carry skis. The men ski beside the sledges. The dogs pull the sledges. The dogs run at a steady trot of about 5 miles an hour for hours at a time. The Norwegian has laid depots. The Norwegian has worked for the whole previous summer, laying depots along the route south. The depots are at every degree of latitude. The depots are marked by tall snow cairns. The cairns are placed in a line east and west so that the party can find them, even if the wind has erased the trail. Each depot holds food and fuel for several weeks. The party reaches the foot of their glacier on the 17th of November. They climb their glacier in 4 days. They emerge onto the polar plateau, 10,000 feet above the sea. They are now at the elevation where the air is thin and where the cold has a different quality, a dry cold that takes the moisture out of the breath and the eyes and the skin. The Norwegian shoots most of the dogs at the top of the plateau. The Norwegians have planned for this from the beginning. The dogs are food. The dogs have pulled the sledges to the top of the climb. The dogs are not needed in their full number for the run to the pole and the run back. The strongest dogs continue. The weaker dogs are killed. The killed dogs are eaten by the men and by the remaining dogs. The Norwegian has written about this in his planning. The Norwegian has called it Butcher's Camp. The Norwegian does not pretend it is anything other than what it is. The dogs are food. The food is fuel for the men who must continue. The remaining dogs pull the smaller sledges across the plateau. The plateau is featureless. The plateau is a flat white nothing to the horizon in every direction. The plateau has no markers. The plateau has no shadows, except the long shadows the men cast in the low sun. The plateau has only the sun, and the snow, and the wind. The men walk south, day after day. The compass tells them they are walking south. The sextant tells them their latitude. Each evening they take the sun's height at noon, and they read the latitude, and they know how far they have come. On the 14th of December, 1911, the sextant says they are at 90 degrees south. 5 men stand in the snow at 5 in the afternoon. They look at the sextant. They look at the compass. They look around them. The horizon is the same horizon they have been looking at for weeks. The snow is the same snow. The cold is the same cold. There is nothing here that marks this place as different from any other place on the plateau, except the number on the sextant. The Norwegian does not say a long speech. The Norwegian has not prepared a long speech. The Norwegian takes from his pack a Norwegian flag, a small flag, the kind that fits in a pack, sewn in red and blue and white. He plants the flag in the snow. The 5 men stand around the flag in a circle. The Norwegian takes a photograph. The photograph shows the 5 men in their reindeer fur coats, standing in the snow, with the flag between them. The photograph is one of the photographs every history of polar exploration will reproduce for 100 years. They build a small tent. The tent is the spare tent the party has been carrying. They leave the tent on the plateau as proof that they have been here. Inside the tent, the Norwegian leaves a letter. The letter is addressed to the King of Norway. The letter says that the Norwegians have reached the pole on this date, and that the letter is left here in case the Norwegian party does not return safely from the plateau. The Norwegian also leaves a second letter inside the tent. The second letter is addressed to Robert Falcon Scott. The second letter is short. The second letter asks Scott, if Scott reaches this place and finds this tent, to deliver the first letter to the King of Norway when Scott returns to the world. The second letter is a courtesy of one polar captain to another. The second letter assumes that Scott may or may not arrive, and that if Scott does arrive, Scott will see the Norwegian tent and know what happened. The Norwegians close the tent. They tie the tent shut against the wind. They check the snow cairns they have built around the tent, so the cairns will still mark the place, even if the snow drifts. They take a last look around the empty plateau. They turn the sledges. They start the return. The return takes them 56 days from the pole back to the Bay of Whales. The dogs are dying off as they go. The dogs are still being eaten. The men are losing weight, but they are not losing what they came in with. The depots the Norwegian laid the previous summer hold what they were supposed to hold. The cairns are still where they were left. The route the Norwegian laid does not fail. The Fram is at the Bay of Whales when the Norwegians return on the 25th of January, 1912. The Norwegians sail north. The world has not yet heard. The British leave Hut Point on the 1st of November, 1911. They have a larger party than the Norwegians at the start. They have the ponies that Oates does not believe in. They have dogs in smaller numbers. They have motor sledges, the first ever taken to the Antarctic, which break down within the first few days and are abandoned on the ice. They have men, 12 men at the start, of whom most will turn back at staged supply depots along the route, and only the final 5 will make the dash to the pole. The party crosses the Ross ice shelf in a slow march. The ponies are dying as the cold gets worse. The men shoot them when they cannot continue. The dogs are sent back to the base after the first leg. because Scott has decided not to use them on the plateau. By the time the party reaches the foot of the Beardmore Glacier, they are pulling the sledges by hand. They climb the Beardmore in 12 days. The Beardmore is harder than the other glacier. The Beardmore is a long, broken staircase of ice falls and crevasses that the men must cross while pulling 400 pounds of sledge each. The Beardmore rises to the plateau in a sequence of switchbacks the men have to find as they go. At the top of the Beardmore, the party reaches the plateau at 10,000 feet. The remaining party is 8 men with 3 sledges. Scott picks the final 5 for the pole here. He picks himself, Wilson, Bowers, Oates, and Evans. The other 3 men, the support party, turn back to the base. They take one of the sledges. They are sent back with the last of the fresh food the party can spare. They are told to wait at the depots for the pole party's return. The 5 men of the pole party continue south. They walk across the plateau for 3 more weeks. They walk into the same featureless white nothing the Norwegians walked into the month before. They are dragging their sledges. They are eating pemmican and ship's biscuit and a small ration of butter and sugar. They are sleeping 3 to a tent in reindeer fur bags that are getting wetter every night because the fur freezes and the men sweat into it, and the moisture cannot escape. On the 16th of January, 1912, the man in the lead of the party sees something black on the snow ahead. It is Bowers who sees it first. Bowers has the sharpest eyes of the 5. He calls back to Scott. Scott halts the party. Scott takes the spyglass from his pack. He raises the spyglass. He sees what Bowers has seen. The thing on the snow is not snow. The thing on the snow is the small, dark shape of a tent. The 5 men of the British party stand in the snow at 4 in the afternoon and look at the Norwegian tent that should not be there. Scott does not speak for a long time. The men do not speak. The wind is the only sound on the plateau. They walk to the tent. The tent is the spare tent the Norwegians left behind a month earlier. The tent has been pinned by snowdrifts. The tent is partly buried. The men dig the tent free of the drift. They open the tent. Inside, they find the letters the Norwegian left. Scott reads the second letter, the one addressed to him. Scott takes the first letter, the one for the King of Norway, and puts it into his own pack. The British have lost the race. Scott does not curse. Scott does not break. Scott folds the Norwegian letter and puts it in his pack. He turns to his men. He says that they have come too far to turn back now. He says they will go on to the pole anyway. He says they will plant a British flag. He says they will document the position for the records. He says they will then begin the return. The men nod. The men are too tired to do anything else. They continue south for 1 more day. On the 17th of January, 1912, the sextant says they are at 90 degrees south. Scott takes out his journal. He writes a line in the journal. The line will be the most quoted line in the British history of the Polar March. The line says, in Scott's own handwriting, "Great God, this is an awful place, and terrible enough for us to have laboured to it without the reward of priority." He puts the journal away. The men plant the British flag, the Union Jack, in the snow beside the tracks where the Norwegian flag had stood a month before. They take a photograph. The photograph shows 5 men in their oilskin coats, their faces burned by sun and wind, standing in the snow at the bottom of the world. The 5 men look very tired. The 5 men do not look triumphant. The 5 men look like men who have walked 800 miles for a destination they were no longer going to have. Bowers sets up the camera. Bowers pulls a string. The shutter opens. The photograph is taken. They turn the sledges. They start the return. The men will not all make it back. The Norwegian won. Scott lost. Both will pay everything before this story is finished. The return march is harder than the march out. The 5 men are tired. The 5 men are eating less than they need to eat. The 5 men are pulling the sledges into a wind that comes from the south, which is to say, a tailwind for the march out and a headwind for the march back. The dawn is later each day, and the dusk earlier, as the southern summer begins to turn back toward autumn. They cross the plateau in stages. They reach the top of the Beardmore Glacier on the 7th of February, 1912. They begin the descent. The Beardmore Glacier on the descent is a different country than on the ascent. The party is going downhill now, which sounds easier and is in some ways harder because the sledges run away on the steep parts and have to be held back, and because the men are exhausted in the legs and find the long downhill march a new kind of pain. The crevasses are still there. The ice falls are still there. The men pick their way down. On the 8th of February, 1912, Scott makes a decision that the history books will remember. The decision is geological. Wilson, who's the chief scientific officer, who's been sketching the rocks and the cliffs and the ice all the way south and all the way back, who has the eye of a man who looks at everything, has noticed something in the rocks at the foot of the moraine they are passing. The moraine is at a place called Buckley Island, which is a small rocky outcrop sticking up from the ice. The rocks of the moraine include layers of dark coal. Wilson points at the coal. Scott looks at the coal. Scott looks at Wilson. Scott understands. Scott gives the order to halt the party for the day. The men make camp at the foot of Buckley Island. Wilson takes his geological hammer. Wilson goes to the moraine. Wilson begins to break the coal into pieces small enough to carry. In the coal, Wilson finds plant impressions. The plant impressions are leaves. The leaves are very old. The leaves are the leaves of a kind of plant that grew on this continent long before this continent had ice on it. The leaves are pressed flat in the coal, like flowers pressed in the pages of a book. The leaves are perfect. The leaves are the kind of fossil that makes a geologist sit very still in the snow with a hammer forgotten in one hand. Wilson breaks more coal. Wilson finds more leaves. Wilson finds branches and roots and the impressions of bark. Scott writes in his journal that night, by the failing lamp in the tent. Scott writes that they had decided to camp for the day and to spend the day geologizing. Scott writes that Wilson, with his sharp eyes, had picked up several plant impressions. The last of them a piece of coal with beautifully traced leaves in layers. The men sleep in the tent. In the morning, Wilson asks Scott if they can take the specimens with them. Scott says yes. The specimens are heavy. The specimens are 35 pounds in total. The party is already pulling more weight than the men can comfortably pull. The party is already eating less than the men need to eat. The party is already moving more slowly each day. The addition of 35 pounds of rock to the sledges is, in the strict accounting of polar travel, a mistake. Wilson does not abandon the fossils. The party does not abandon Wilson. The 5 men load the rocks into the sledges. The 5 men continue down the Beardmore, with the rocks under the tarpaulin, alongside the spare clothes and the spare food and the spare paraffin. The rocks travel with the men. Edgar Evans falls behind first. Evans had cut his hand a few weeks before, on the run down to the pole. The cut had not healed. The cut had become an open wound in the cold. The cut had become an infected wound. Evans had been hiding the cut. Evans had been pulling his weight at the sledge, while his hand failed underneath the wrappings. By the time the party reaches the foot of the Beardmore, on the 17th of February, 1912, Evans is no longer pulling. Evans is walking beside the sledge, but with his hands hanging at his sides. Evans is slowing down. Evans is falling behind. Evans is forgetting things. Evans is taking off his coat in the cold without realizing he has done it. The other 4 men try to keep Evans with them. They put him on the sledge for a stretch. They give him their tea. They watch him. In the afternoon of the 17th of February, Evans falls in the snow and does not get up. The 4 other men reach him in the white wind. Evans is breathing, but he does not respond. The 4 men carry Evans into the tent. They lay him in his sleeping bag. They warm tea on the Primus stove. They put the tea to his mouth. Evans dies in the tent that night. He is the first to die. The 4 men bury him as well as they can in the snow at the foot of the Beardmore Glacier. They mark the place with a small wooden cross they have been carrying for exactly this purpose. They continue the next morning with the sledges that now carry the geological specimens and Evans's share of the food they will not eat together. Wilson does not say anything about the fossils. The party does not say anything about Wilson. The 4 men walk north. The 4 men are Scott and Wilson and Bowers and Oates. The 4 men are getting weaker. The 4 men are walking against the wind. The 4 men are eating less than they should and burning more than they eat. The 4 men are losing the small things that men lose when they are starving on the ice. Their teeth are loosening in their gums. Their gums are bleeding. Their skin is dry and cracking. Their fingers are swollen with the early signs of frostbite that comes back and back until it does not come back anymore, because the tissue is dead. Lawrence Oates is the worst of the 4. Oates had taken a wound at the pole that nobody had noticed at the time. Oates had taken frostbite in his feet. The frostbite had gone deep. The frostbite was now gangrene. The gangrene was now in his toes and into the front of his foot and beginning to climb up the ankle. Oates was in a kind of pain that the other 3 men could see in his face, but that Oates would not name. Oates walked anyway. Oates walked because to stop walking was to stop, and to stop on the ice was to die, and Oates was not yet ready to die. Oates pulled at the sledge with the others. Oates kept up, but Oates was getting slower. The slowness of Oates was killing the party. The party could only walk as fast as its slowest man. The party had to camp earlier each day. The party had to start later each morning because Oates needed longer to get his boots on over his black and swollen feet. The party was losing miles each day. The depots were further apart in time than they had been when the party walked south. The depots were the only food the party would have. If the party did not reach a depot in time, the party would run out of food before the next depot. Oates knew this. Oates knew this for many days before he did what he did. The 17th of March, 1912, was Lawrence Oates's birthday. He turned 32 on the ice. The party did not celebrate. The party was too tired to celebrate. That evening, the four men made camp in a low place between two long drifts of snow. Outside the tent, the wind was blowing. Inside the tent, the lamp was guttering. The Primus stove was making the slow, soft hiss it made when there was almost no paraffin left. Oates spoke. Oates said quietly that he was going outside for a moment. The other three men understood. The other three men tried not to understand, because to understand was to lose Oates. And they did not want to lose Oates. But they did understand. They knew Oates had been planning this for days. They knew Oates was going to walk out of the tent in the storm and not come back. Oates put on his boots. The boots were hard to get on. The boots took a long time. Oates was patient with the boots. Oates did not look at the other three men while he put the boots on. Oates stood up. Oates said, in a quiet voice that the other three men would remember for the rest of their lives, in different ways, depending on who was telling the story afterward. The line that everyone in this story has been told, he said. The line was, "I am just going outside, and maybe some time." Oates went out. The tent flap closed behind him. Outside the tent, the wind was blowing snow horizontally across the ice. Oates walked into the wind, into the white, away from the tent. The other three men listened. They heard nothing. The wind covered the sound of his steps. After a few minutes, the wind was the only sound. Scott took out his journal. Scott wrote about what had just happened. Scott wrote that they had known that poor Oates was walking to his death, but that though they had tried to dissuade him, they had known it was the act of a brave man and an English gentleman. The three men did not look for Oates. They knew they would not find him. They knew that if they had found him, they would have brought him back into the tent, and that this would have made his sacrifice meaningless. The three men sat in the tent and listened to the wind. After a while, Scott blew out the lamp. The three men lay down in their sleeping bags. The three men did not sleep, but they lay down. In the morning, the wind was still blowing. The men opened the tent flap. They saw nothing in any direction except the white wind. They could not have followed his tracks. There were no tracks. The three men struck the camp. The three men pulled the sledge into the wind. The three men walked north. There were three men now instead of four. Scott and Wilson and Bowers walk for another 10 or 11 days. They walk through weather that the explorers who come after them will study for the rest of the century. The weather of the southern autumn of 1912 is unusually cold and unusually constant in a way that the men on the ice cannot know, but that we know now from the data the weather stations the men had set up earlier in the expedition would later record. The temperatures are 10 or 20 degrees below the normal for that latitude in that month. The wind does not slacken in the afternoons the way it usually slackens. The blizzards come closer together than they should. The three men do not know any of this. The three men only know that the cold is the cold they are walking in. They make their last camp on the 20th of March, 1912. They pitch the tent in a snow hollow. They put the sledges as windbreaks on the eastern side. They light the Primus stove. They make tea for the last 2 cups of paraffin they have. They eat the last of the food they have brought from the previous depot. The next depot, the 1-ton depot, is 11 miles to the north. 11 miles is half a day's walking for a healthy man on packed snow. 11 miles is one day for a tired man with a sledge. 11 miles, in the weather of late March 1912, in the condition that Scott and Wilson and Bowers are in, is more than they can manage. The blizzard arrives in the night. The blizzard does not pass. The blizzard stays for 9 days, then 10, then more, blowing snow horizontally across the ice, blocking the men inside the tent without enough food and without enough fuel and without the strength to leave the tent and walk into the wind. The men do not panic. The men have no reason to panic that would change anything. The men make small ration choices. The men give each other the last of what is shareable. The men talk. The men write letters in the dimming light. Scott writes letters to his wife and his mother, and to the wives of the men in the tent with him. Scott writes a long letter that he calls a message to the public, addressed to whoever will find them. The blizzard keeps blowing. The food runs out. The paraffin runs out. The men can no longer warm themselves. The men can no longer make tea. The men can no longer pretend that the tent is anything other than what it is now, which is a small canvas room at the edge of a country that will not let them leave. Scott writes the last entry in his journal. The last entry is calm. The last entry is short. The last entry says that they have been ready every day to start for the depot 11 miles away, but that outside the door of the tent, it remains a scene of whirling drift. The last entry says they do not think they can hope for any better things now. The last entry says they will stick it out to the end, but they are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. Scott closes the journal. Scott puts the journal under his head with the letters. The wind does not stop. The men do not leave the tent. The paraffin is gone. The food is gone. But the men are breathing. The men lie in the dark and listen to the ice against the canvas. The trap has closed, but the trap has not yet finished its work. The continent waits. The blizzard arrives in the night of the 20th of March, 1912. The 3 men in the tent are Scott, Wilson, and Bowers. They have been walking north from the pole for 2 months. They are 11 miles from the next food depot, which is called the 1-ton depot, and they have been trying to reach it for almost a week. They have not been able to leave the tent. The wind has been blowing horizontally across the snow outside the door of the tent since they pitched the camp. The wind has not stopped. The tent is small. The tent is a triangle of canvas, 6 feet across and 7 feet long, with a sloping roof that comes down to about chest height inside. The 3 men lie in their sleeping bags side by side. The sleeping bags are made of reindeer fur. The reindeer fur has been getting damper and harder each night for many weeks because the men have been sweating into them and the moisture has been freezing, and the bags are now stiff with old ice in the seams. The 3 men lie close together in the cold. They take warmth from each other when they can. The fuel for the Primus stove is almost gone. They have enough paraffin for 2 cups of tea apiece. They have a small ration of pemmican and ship's biscuit, perhaps 2 days of food if they share carefully. There is no fresh food. There is no whiskey or brandy left for the cold. There is no medicine left in Wilson's small medical kit. There is the lamp, which gives out a faint warm light from the corner of the tent, and a little of the paraffin keeps the lamp going. When the paraffin is gone, the lamp will also be gone. and the tent will be dark. The men talk. They talk softly because they are tired. They talk about the men they left behind at the base. They talk about the families they will not see again. Scott talks about his wife and his small son. Wilson talks about his wife and about his work. Bowers, who is the youngest, talks about his mother in Scotland and about the way her kitchen smelled on a winter morning when he was a boy. The three men do not pretend. They have known for some days now that they are going to die in this tent. They have known it since the 8th or 9th day of the blizzard, when the food ran out enough that they could not have made the dash to the depot, even if the weather had cleared. They have known it longer than they have said it. The day they all said it was a quiet day, sometime in the middle of the long blizzard, when Scott put down his pencil and looked at the other two and said, in his calm naval voice, that they would not be going on. The other two nodded. There was nothing to argue. After that, they began to write letters. Scott has written more than the other two. He has written to his wife. He has written to his mother. He has written to the wives of his men, including Wilson's wife, Oriana, who is at home in England. He has written to a long list of friends. He has written what he calls a message to the public, which he intends as a defense of the expedition's decisions and a tribute to the courage of his companions. He writes by the light of the lamp. He writes in his journal first, and then on small pieces of folded paper that he tucks under his shoulder against the cold. Wilson has written too, but less. Wilson has written one long letter to his wife. Wilson has written one short note to his parents. Wilson has written a few last pages in his diary. Wilson has spent more of his time in these last days sketching the inside of the tent, the lamp, the corner where Bowers has folded his coat, the way Scott's hand looks when Scott is writing. Wilson does not say what the sketches are for. The sketches are for himself. Wilson has been sketching the whole expedition since the beginning, and he is sketching its end. Bowers has written a long letter to his mother. The wind outside does not slacken. The men sleep when they can. The men wake when the cold gets into the sleeping bags. The men talk a little, then sleep a little more. The men drink small mouthfuls of cold tea. The men ration the biscuit. The men do not move from the tent. Time inside the tent stops behaving like time. The hours run together. The men cannot tell what day it is without consulting Scott's pocket watch. Scott consults the watch in the morning when the lamp is on. Scott writes the date in the diary. Scott has been writing the date for many days. The date keeps advancing. The blizzard does not. Scott writes the last entry in his journal toward the end of March in 1912. The exact day is not certain. The most likely day is the 29th. The last entry could have been written on the 30th or the 31st. What is certain is that on the 29th, the food was nearly gone, the paraffin was nearly gone, and the wind had not stopped for 9 straight days. The last entry is short. The last entry says, in Scott's careful hand, "We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far." The last entry says they have been ready every day to start for the depot 11 miles away. The last entry says outside the door of the tent it remains a scene of whirling drift. The last entry says they do not think they can hope for any better things now. Scott closes the journal. Scott puts the journal under his head with the letters. The wind does not stop. The men do not leave the tent. For a long time after the last entry, the three men in the tent are still alive. They do not speak much. They lie in their sleeping bags. They take occasional sips of cold water. They share the last of the biscuit. They look at the lamp. The lamp goes out when the paraffin is gone. The tent is dark. In the dark, the three men slip into something that is not quite sleep and not quite waking. The cold is a presence in the tent now. A fourth member of the party. The one with the most room and the most patience. The cold takes Wilson first, then Bowers, then Scott. Or perhaps the order is different. The order will not be known. The three men slip from the dark of the tent into a deeper dark. Each man slips when it is his turn. There is no struggle in this tent. There is no noise. There is only the wind outside and the slow, steady cold inside, and the three men in their sleeping bags taking turns to let go. When Wilson dies, his sleeping bag is zipped up against the cold. He is on his side. His hands are folded against his chest. His face is peaceful. When Bowers dies, his sleeping bag is also zipped up, and he is in the same posture. He looks like he is asleep. When Scott dies, he is the last. Scott has done one more thing before he goes. Scott has reached out from his own sleeping bag and put his arm across the body of his friend Wilson. The arm is bare because Scott has thrown back the flap of his sleeping bag in his last moments. The arm is on top of Wilson's chest. Scott's hand rests on Wilson's shoulder. The three men are still. The tent is dark. The wind keeps blowing. The snow piles around the tent. The snow climbs the canvas walls. The snow blocks the door of the tent. The snow buries the sledges that the men had set up as windbreaks on the eastern side. The snow keeps blowing. The continent has them now. The continent that the men walked across for 2,000 miles. The continent they pushed against and lost to. The continent that did not invite them and did not know they were here, has taken them into itself. The men are part of the continent now. For 8 months, the three men lie in the tent under the slowly deepening snow. The blizzard ends a few weeks after they die. The wind shifts. The summer comes back in its small Antarctic way, and the snow on the tent partly melts at the surface and then refreezes. The shape of the tent under the snow becomes less and less like a tent, and more like a small hill on the white plain. From a distance, the small hill is not noticeable. The continent has many small hills. The continent has had small hills like this one for many millions of years. No one passes by. The men at the base, miles away, do not know yet what has happened. The men at the base have hoped, through the autumn and the winter, that Scott's party would still walk in. Then they have admitted to themselves that the party is not walking in. Then they have made plans for the spring, when the weather will let them go and look. The spring comes slowly. Then it comes fully. The sun returns above the horizon. The base sends out a search party. The search party walks south. On the 12th of November, 1912, a small party of men walking south across the Ross ice shelf sees something on the snow that does not belong. The party is led by a Navy surgeon named Edward Atkinson. Atkinson was with Scott on the Discovery expedition more than a decade ago, and Atkinson knows the polar plain. Atkinson and his men have been walking for many days. They have been looking for the tent or the bodies of any of the men who did not return. The thing on the snow is a mound. The mound is small. The mound is not a normal feature of the plain. Atkinson stops the party. Atkinson walks toward the mound. The other men follow. When they reach the mound, Atkinson takes the shovel from his sledge and begins to dig. The other men help. The snow on the mound is not deep. The men dig for less than half an hour before they find the tip of a tent pole. The tent is there. Atkinson sends the other men away from the immediate area. He himself bends down and opens the flap of the tent. He looks in. He sees the 3 sleeping bags. He sees the men inside the sleeping bags. He sees Wilson on the left, with his hands folded. He sees Bowers on the right, in the same posture. He sees Scott in the middle, with his arm extended across Wilson's chest. He sees the journals stacked under Scott's head. He sees the letters on the floor of the tent. Atkinson closes the flap. He stands up in the cold. He breathes for a long time before he speaks. When he speaks, he gives the orders quietly. He tells the men that the party is here. He tells them that Scott and Wilson and Bowers are inside. He tells them what they will do next. What they do next is this. They take from the tent the personal effects of the 3 men. They take the journals. They take the letters. They take Scott's message to the public. They take the geological specimens, which are still wrapped in cloth and tied with cord, exactly as Wilson packed them on the Beardmore Glacier 9 months ago. The specimens weigh 35 pounds. The specimens are heavy. The men carry them anyway. They do not move the bodies. They make a decision, standing in the cold beside the tent, that the bodies will stay where they are. The bodies are inside the tent, in the sleeping bags, in the postures their friends died in. To move them would be to disturb them. The continent has them. The continent should keep them. They build a cairn over the tent. The cairn is made of snow. The men shovel snow over the tent. They shape the snow into a dome. The dome is taller than a man. The dome is wider than the tent itself. The dome is a small white hill on the flat plain. They top the cairn with a cross. The cross is made of 2 skis, lashed together at the center with strips of canvas. The cross is taller than a man. The cross stands at the highest point of the cairn. The cross can be seen from a long way off in the right light. The cross is the only marker on the cairn that says, there are people here. They leave the 2 sledges of the dead party near the cairn. The sledges have not moved since Scott's men set them as windbreaks. The sledges stay. Atkinson writes a short note in a small cylinder. The note records the date, the position, the names of the 3 men buried beneath the cairn, the names of the men in the search party, and the fact of the burial. Atkinson seals the cylinder. He places the cylinder in a small cleft in the cairn. The search party stands beside the cairn for a long time. The men remove their hats. There is no prayer that anyone wants to read out loud. The wind is the only sound. Then the search party turns north. They begin the walk back to the base. The walk takes them many days. They carry the 35 pounds of geological specimens with them. They carry the letters. They carry the journals. They carry the message to the public. They carry the small things that the 3 men in the tent had not been able to carry with them on their last march. The search party reaches the base in the middle of December. The men at the base hear the news. The expedition is over. The bodies are not coming back. The continent keeps the cairn. The cairn keeps the tent. The tent keeps the 3 men. Every year afterward, the cairn sinks a little lower into the ice sheet. The cross at the top falls eventually. The cairn becomes part of the moving ice that flows slowly toward the sea. The cairn moves with the ice across many decades. By the present day, the cairn is no longer near the place where Atkinson built it. The cairn has drifted with the ice, miles from its original position, and it is buried much deeper than it was. The cairn is somewhere under the surface of the Ross Ice Shelf. The cairn is moving slowly toward the open sea. In some future century, the part of the shelf that holds the cairn will break off as an iceberg. The iceberg will drift out into the Southern Ocean. The iceberg will melt. The three men will then enter the sea. That has not happened yet. That is still to come. The geological specimens that Atkinson brought back from the cairn are sent to Cambridge. They are sent in the winter of 1913, packed in wooden crates, on a steamer from New Zealand to England. They arrive at the laboratory of a botanist named Albert Seward in early 1914. Seward is a careful man. He is in his early 50s. He has been studying fossil plants for most of his working life. He has the long, patient eyes of a man who has spent decades looking at small things under glass. He unwraps the cloth bundles slowly. He lays the pieces of dark coal on the long wooden table in his laboratory. He turns each piece of coal in the light from the high windows. The coal has impressions in it. The impressions are leaves. The leaves are old. The leaves are very old. The leaves are not the leaves of any tree that grows in the world today. The leaves are tongue-shaped, narrow at the base and wider at the tip, with parallel veins running from the stem to the edge of the leaf. The leaves are pressed flat in the coal, as if a book had been closed on them. But the book in this case is the coal itself, and the closing took a very long time. Seward has seen leaves like these before. He has seen them in fossils from India. He has seen them in fossils from Australia. He has seen them in fossils from Southern Africa. He has seen them in fossils from South America. He has never seen them from Antarctica. He has never expected to see them from Antarctica, because no one had ever found such fossils there. The continent was supposed to have no past. The continent was supposed to have always been the cold place at the bottom of the world. Seward sits at his table for a long time, with the coal in his hands. The leaves on the coal are the leaves of plants that grew on a single large landmass. Long ago, before that landmass broke apart into the continents we know today. The leaves are the same kind of leaves on every continent that was once part of that single landmass. Seward and other scientists already know that India, Australia, Southern Africa, and South America were once joined into one piece of land. They know this because the fossil leaves are the same on all four. But Antarctica had not been part of the picture until now. The leaves in front of Seward are the missing piece. The leaves prove that Antarctica was once joined to the others. The leaves prove that the continent had a past as a warm green country, the same kind of warm green country that the other continents were. Seward writes a paper. The paper is short. The paper does not draw the bigger conclusions in dramatic language. The paper notes the find. The paper identifies the leaves. The paper records that the specimens were recovered by a member of the Scott expedition on the Beardmore Glacier in February of 1912. The paper is published. Other scientists read it. The bigger conclusions are drawn over the next several decades. It will take another 40 or 50 years for the larger idea, the idea that the continents have been moving across the Earth for hundreds of millions of years, to be accepted by most working scientists. The general theory will not be settled until the 1960s, when the evidence from the ocean floor finally locks the picture in place. Seward and his contemporaries did not live to see the theory accepted, but the leaves in the coal were already telling the story. The leaves in the coal are the leaves that Edward Wilson picked up in the snow on the Beardmore Glacier in February of 1912, 4 months before he died in the tent on the Ross Ice Shelf. The leaves are the leaves Wilson refused to abandon. The leaves travelled with Wilson to the pole and back. The leaves travelled in the sledge as the party weakened. The leaves were beside Wilson in the tent when Wilson died. The leaves were carried out by Atkinson in November. The leaves crossed the Southern Ocean in the winter of 1913. The leaves reached Cambridge in the early spring of 1914. The leaves are now in a small wooden tray in Seward's laboratory. The leaves are about 250 million years old. The man who picked them up was 40 years old when he died. The leaves outlived the man by every measure that can be applied. The leaves had outlived the man before the man was ever born. The leaves had outlived all the men who had ever been born and would ever be born. The leaves had outlived the continent the man came from. The leaves had outlived the supercontinent the leaves themselves had grown on. The great single landmass that the world had been 250 million years ago. The leaves are still leaves. The man is gone. A few of the men who had been on the Scott expedition survived to come home to England. Most of them did not write much about what happened. They went back to their lives. They worked at navy desks, or kept country houses, or rejoined the army for the war that began the summer after Seward identified the leaves at Cambridge. The war took some of them. The flu of 1918 and 1919 took others. The expedition slowly faded, in the way old things fade. But one of the younger officers wrote a book. The book came out in 1922, 10 years after the deaths in the tent. The book is long. The book is honest about the expedition's mistakes, including the mistakes of Scott, whom the officer had loved and admired and disagreed with about polar tactics. The book is honest about what it felt like to walk in the dark for months on end and to come back changed in ways that did not heal. The book is called The Worst Journey in the World. The book is a good book. The book is read across the English-speaking world in the 1920s and onward. The book becomes the way most people remember the Scott expedition. The book frames the expedition not as a race to the pole that ended in death, but as a long, careful, scientific journey into a place that had not been understood, and that took several men who had loved it and who had walked into it with their eyes open. The book argues that the death of Scott and his companions was not a defeat. The book argues that the death was the cost of the work, and that the work was worth doing. This view holds more or less for many decades. Then, in the late 1990s, a different kind of scientist takes another look at the deaths. She is an atmospheric scientist. She has spent her career studying the chemistry of the upper air and the way the weather works at very high latitudes. She has access to 17 years of data from the weather stations that have been running continuously at the South Pole since the 1950s. The data has long records of the daily temperatures, the wind speeds, and the patterns of cold spells going back many decades. She looks at the data for March of 1912. She looks at the data for the latitude where Scott and his party died. She compares what the weather did that March against the average weather at the same latitude in all the other Marches the stations had recorded. The weather of March 1912, she finds, was unusually cold. The cold spell that pinned the 3 men in their tent was not a normal blizzard. The temperatures were 10 to 20 degrees below the long-run average for the same place at the same time of year. The wind blew at unusually high speeds for unusually long stretches. The blizzard kept going for many days longer than the climatology said it should have. She writes a paper. The paper is published in 1999. The paper does not say that Scott made no mistakes. The paper does not absolve the choice of man-hauling, or the choice of going to the pole at all, or the choice to take heavy geological specimens on the return march. The paper says only this, that the weather of March 1912 was bad enough to have killed a healthier party than Scott's was at that point. The paper says that the men in the tent died, in significant part, because they were caught in a once-in-a-generation cold spell that nothing they could have done would have prepared them for. The reading of Scott's death shifts a little after this paper. Not all the way, but a little. The men in the tent were not just unlucky in their planning, they were also unlucky in their weather. The leaves in Seward's laboratory had been quiet about all of this. The leaves do not care about weather. The leaves had been pressed flat in the coal 250 million years before any human being would have an opinion about the cold of March 1912. But the leaves were waiting. The leaves had a longer view than any of the men who walked into the cold. It is now more than 100 years since the 3 men died in the tent. In our own time, the continent that took them has begun to do something that the men in the tent would have been astonished by. The continent has begun to talk. It talks through the ice. Scientists in our century use satellites in orbit around the Earth to look down at the surface of the ice sheet and measure how high the ice is at every place. The satellites are very precise. They can detect changes in the surface of the ice of only a few inches across thousands of square miles. The satellites have been watching the continent for many years. What the satellites have shown is that the ice sheet is not a single still mass. The ice sheet has hidden lakes inside it. The lakes are buried under a mile or 2 of solid ice. The lakes fill and drain slowly. When the lakes fill, the surface of the ice above them rises a little. When the lakes drain, the surface settles. The satellites can see this happening. In the most recent counts, the continent holds more than 200 active hidden lakes. About 85 of them have been found only in the last decade, since the satellites became precise enough to see them. The lakes are connected to each other in some places by long, slow rivers of water that run between the bedrock and the underside of the ice. The continent has rivers we cannot see and lakes we cannot reach, all running quietly beneath a mile of frozen weight. The continent is also losing some of its outer ice. A glacier on the long peninsula that points up towards South America retreated by 15 miles in 15 months a few years ago. The retreat was watched by satellites. The peak rate of retreat was about half a mile per day. for some weeks in late autumn of one year. This was the fastest rate of grounded ice loss that scientists have ever measured on the continent. The glacier is one piece of the long edge of the ice sheet. Other pieces of the edge are also retreating in their own ways. The continent that swallowed Scott's expedition is now revealing itself a little more each year. The leaves in the coal, the leaves that Wilson picked up on the Beardmore Glacier in February of 1912, are still in their tray in Cambridge. The leaves are still about 250 million years old. The man who picked them up is still gone. But the continent the leaves came from is starting to give up some of its memories. The slow ice is moving. The hidden lakes are draining and refilling. The long edges of the sheet are receding. Somewhere far below the surface, the cairn that Atkinson built in 1912 is moving with the ice toward the sea. The three men inside are moving with it. In some future century, the iceberg that holds the cairn will calve from the shelf. The iceberg will drift north into warmer water. The iceberg will melt. The three men will leave the ice and enter the ocean. The ocean will take them in. That will be the end of the cairn. That will not be the end of the leaves. The leaves will still be in Cambridge. The leaves will still be 250 million years old. The leaves will still be the leaves of a forest that grew on a continent before the continent froze, before any human being walked on it, before any person knew that the continent was there. The continent that froze, that took the forest and the frog and the warm afternoons of the long Eocene, that turned the lowland palms into the deepest cold on earth, that swallowed the men who came to walk on it, and that kept their cairn moving with the slow ice toward the sea. That continent has been doing what continents do for hundreds of millions of years. The leaves were there before the cold. The leaves are still there now. The leaves will be there for a long time yet. Sleep well. History continues. The old stories have been told 1,000 times. None of them are quite the same when I tell them. This is the Drifting Historian. Until the next one.